The storm came crawling down from the mountains like something alive, a gray animal with claws of rain and a voice that rolled through the valley. Jonas Hale felt it before he saw it. The wind carried the smell of iron and wet sage, and his horse, Ranger, tossed his head uneasily. Jonas drew his coat tighter, squinting through the grit that spun around him in restless spirals. Somewhere out there, 2 of his yearlings had broken through the fence and wandered too far. He'd been tracking their hoofprints since morning, following them down toward the dry creek that marked the edge of Apache country. The sky had turned the color of bruised metal when he saw the shape in the dust. At first, he thought it was a bundle of rags or a dead calf caught in the brush. But as he rode closer, the truth came clear. A woman, small and still, half covered in wind-blown sand. Her skin bronze and dry as earth. Her hair, black ropes tangled across her face. Jonas slid down from his saddle, boots sinking into the red dirt. She wasn't dead. Not yet. When he brushed the sand from her cheek, her eyes fluttered open, dark, glassy, and far away. Her breath came thin as thread. The lower part of her legs was bound in blood-soaked cloth, twisted and torn from some old wagon wreck or worse. Flies hovered where the blood had dried. Jonas felt the weight of the moment settle on him like the storm's first raindrops. Heavy, inevitable. Easy now, he murmured, though she likely didn't understand his words. You're all right. But she wasn't. Not by any measure the world used. Her whisper came faint, a single word in Apache, one he didn't know. She tried to push herself away, fear flickering behind the pain, but her arms gave out. Jonas hesitated, torn between duty and the knowledge that whatever he did now would mark him to both sides. The settlers who already called him strange, and the Apache who'd see him as a trespasser. He thought of turning away, just for a heartbeat. But his horse shifted beside him, impatient, and he saw how small her hands were, how the wind was already burying her again, grain by grain. Something in him, something that hadn't moved since his wife's death, stirred. He bent, lifted her as gently as his strength allowed, and carried her to the saddle. Her body was light, too light. He mounted behind, one arm around her shoulders, steadying her against the storm's push. She didn't cry out. She didn't look at him. She just breathed, shallow and broken, as the rain began to fall. By the time they reached the ranch, night had closed its fist around the hills. The wind rattled the barn doors like a ghost demanding entry. Jonas dismounted stiffly, his shoulders aching. He carried her inside the cabin, his cabin, once built for 2. The fire in the hearth had gone cold. He lit it again, the flame shivering to life in the draft. He laid her on his late wife's old cot, covering her with a wool blanket. Her skin burned under his touch. Fever had already claimed her. He found water, dampened a rag, and began wiping the dust and blood from her face. Beneath the grime, she was younger than he'd thought, maybe mid-20s, her cheekbones proud, her lips cracked but soft. When he unwrapped the cloth around her legs, he understood why she'd been left. The damage was old but cruel, bones shattered beyond healing, scars puckered and white against brown skin. Someone had tried to bind the wounds, then walked away. Jonas sat back, the firelight catching the lines on his face. He poured whiskey into a tin cup, stared at it, then drank half himself before cleaning the wounds with what was left. She groaned once, the sound like wind through a broken flute. "Reckon you'll hate me for this later," he said quietly. "But you're not dying here." Outside, thunder rolled over the land. Inside, the only sound was the pop of burning wood and the soft, rasping breath of the woman who should have been dead. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside gleamed with rain. Jonas brewed coffee, strong, black, and set a cup on the table beside her bed. She woke briefly, her eyes unfocused, her lips moving without sound. He didn't ask questions. There'd be time for that later. When the sun climbed over the ridge, he saddled up and rode to town for supplies. The townsfolk met him with stares sharp enough to cut. The storekeeper's wife whispered to another woman near the flour sacks, glancing at the blood on his coat. "Found someone hurt out by the flats," Jonas said simply. "Apache?" He said nothing. Silence was answer enough. On the ride back, He thought of what the preacher had once said over his wife's grave. Mercy's a man's last good act when the world's gone mean. He reached the ranch at sunset. Smoke rose thin from the chimney. Inside she was awake, eyes tracing the rafters. When he entered, she flinched but didn't turn away. He knelt beside the cot, unsure how to bridge the gulf between them. He pointed to himself. Jonas. Then to her. She blinked, slow, cautious. Nia, she whispered. The name lingered in the air like the last note of a prayer. He nodded. Nia. That night, he sat by the window with the rifle across his lap, watching the horizon while she slept. The wind outside had gone soft, brushing against the glass with the sound of old lullabies. From the rafters, the empty rocking chair creaked once, moved by a draft. He looked at it a long time, remembering the woman who'd once sat there, her shawl, her laughter, the smell of bread in the oven. The fire burned low. Nia stirred, murmuring in her sleep, words in a tongue he didn't know. Jonas whispered into the dark, mostly to himself. Ain't no one useless. Not if they're still breathing. He didn't know if it was true, but saying it out loud made the silence a little easier to bear. Outside, the land stretched wide and empty, a world both of them had been left behind by. Yet somewhere between the whisper of wind and the crackle of fire, something began, small as a spark, stubborn as life itself. Emotional realization. Jonas learns that salvation isn't in grand gestures, but in the refusal to walk away from another soul. For Nia, drifting between fever and awareness, the world that had abandoned her feels distant, yet within the stranger's silence, she senses a will to keep her alive. Morning came slow to the valley. The air was cold and clean, the kind that carried every sound across miles. The clatter of a loose shutter, the cough of a horse, the sigh of wind through empty sage. Inside the cabin, time had its own rhythm. Firelight flickered against rough-hewn walls, and the smell of smoke clung to everything, to the quilts, the wood, and to the skin of the two people learning, in their quiet way, to keep each other alive. Jonas rose before dawn, as he always had, though the ranch no longer demanded it. His herd was smaller now, his fences still half broken from winter storms. But he moved through the same motions, tending, fixing, working, because stillness brought the ghosts too close. He'd built a small wooden cot beside the hearth for Nia, one he'd planned by hand from old cedar boards. The scent of the wood filled the cabin, sharp and clean against the musty air. She slept most days, drifting between fever and uneasy dreams. When she woke, she spoke little, her English sparse, shaped by caution and pride. He tried not to crowd her. He offered coffee she couldn't yet hold, and food she could only nibble when he wasn't looking. The silence between them was not awkward, not even cold, just heavy. Like a blanket soaked in rain, one morning, as he adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, she noticed something hanging in the far corner of the cabin, a shape pale and soft beneath the dust. A dress, once white, now turned the color of ashes. The hem brushed the floorboards, motionless except when the wind crept through a crack in the wall. Nia looked at it a long while. Jonas followed her gaze, then turned away. "Was my wife's," he said, his voice flat, as if speaking to no one. "She used to wear it Sundays." Nia lowered her eyes. She understood enough, that the man who'd saved her lived with ghosts, too. Later that day when Jonas went to the barn, Nia asked the fire a question in her own language, quiet, meant for no ears but the flames. She asked if the spirits of her people still saw her, if they knew she was alive. No answer came, only the crackle of wood. That night, the sky turned sharp and blue-black. Through the single cabin window, stars spread like shards of bone scattered across a dark field. Nia couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the campfires of her tribe, the flicker of her mother's face turned away, the laughter of her cousins as they called her worthless. The memory burned harder than fever. She remembered the day they'd left her. After the wagon overturned on the rocky trail, after her legs were crushed beneath its weight, the elders had whispered about bad omens. To lose limbs was to lose spirit, they said. To keep her would anger the ancestors. Her mother had wept, but didn't speak against them. When they rode away at dawn, Nia watched the dust of their departure blur into the horizon. The silence that followed had never ended. Now, miles away, in a white man's cabin, she could still smell that same dust every time she breathed. Jonas sat by the table, oiling his rifle with a rag, his face half hidden in the lamplight. It was an old habit, keeping his hands busy while his thoughts wandered where he didn't want them to go. He'd been doing it since before his wife took sick, before the graveyard on the ridge held her name beneath a crooked wooden cross. He glanced up sometimes to see if Nia slept. When he caught her watching him, he gave a brief nod. Not a greeting, just acknowledgement. She returned it, her expression unreadable. In those exchanges, something wordless passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the faint recognition of another soul stitched together by loss. The next morning brought thin sunlight and the smell of thawing earth. Jonas set a stool beside Nia's cot, a wooden bowl on his knee. He crushed wild herbs between his fingers, their scent sharp and green. "For the pain," he said. She hesitated, then took the mixture, swallowing carefully. Her hands trembled. When she tried to thank him, the word came halting, unsure. "You... good man." He shook his head, eyes still on the fire. "Just a man." She studied him, the roughness of his hands, the way his shoulders never quite relaxed, even in his own home. A man who did not know how to rest. Later, when he stepped outside, she heard the soft clatter of tools, hammer, nails, the scrape of a whetstone against metal. He mended things not because they needed mending, but because if his hand stopped, his heart might remember what it had lost. By afternoon, clouds gathered again. The light through the window turned pale and gold, flickering as if the day itself couldn't decide whether to stay or go. Nia's fever broke in the night. Sweat soaked her hair. Jonas wiped her brow, his rough hands trembling at the gentleness required. She murmured something in her tongue. A name, perhaps. He didn't ask. When the dawn came, the storm had passed again, leaving the world washed clean. Outside, drops of rain clung to every fence post and blade of grass. Jonas sat on the porch, cup of coffee in hand, watching the mist rise from the valley. Behind him, he heard the faint creak of the cot, Nia shifting, alive. For the first time in a long while, he felt something close to peace. Not joy, not yet, but the soft easing of a burden. Inside that small cabin, grief had found a companion in silence. And silence, shared, had begun to sound almost like grace. That night, before sleep, Nia looked toward the old wedding dress again. It hung unmoving, pale as moonlight. And she whispered to it, a prayer or perhaps a promise, that the dead woman's home would not become her grave too. The fire's reflection shimmered across her face, warm against the scars that marked her legs. Across the room, Jonas turned the rifle over in his lap, the oiled wood gleaming faintly. He no longer knew why he kept it ready. Habit, perhaps. Or maybe he understood something wordless, that in this land, mercy often needed its own kind of weapon. Emotional realization. Both Jonas and Nia live surrounded by ghosts of their pasts, the ones who left and the ones who linger. In their shared silence, they begin to understand that endurance itself can be a language, and that some kindnesses are built not from words, but from presence. The first sign of the storm came not from the sky, but from the cattle. Their restlessness reached the cabin before the thunder did, a low, anxious bawling from the far end of the field. Jonas stepped outside, the cold biting his face, and saw the clouds boiling up from the north, thick as smoke. Wind tore across the ridge, carrying flecks of snow that burned against his skin. He moved fast, securing the barn doors with rope, cursing under his breath when one hinge broke loose. The animals shifted and kicked, their panic contagious. He spoke to them the way a man does who's long run out of gentler words, steady, low, promising they'd see morning. When the last of the boards was braced, he turned toward the house. The light from the window glowed faintly through the white blur of wind. Inside, Nia sat upright in bed, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The fire crackled, but the draft snuck through every seam in the cabin walls. Her fingers trembled around the cup of tea Jonas had left her. Every gust made the roof groan like an old ship at sea. Then came the sound of hooves, At first distant, then nearer, deliberate, slow, cutting through the howl of wind. Jonas froze, hand still on the latch. Few men rode in weather like this unless pushed by desperation or ill intent. He opened the door, snow swirling in around his boots. Out of the storm came a rider, tall, broad, wrapped in a dark oilskin coat. The horse beneath him was lathered and wild-eyed. "Mind if I come in, Hale?" The man called over the wind, voice rough with the cold. Jonas recognized him before the face appeared clear. Clem Rourke, a drifter, sometimes bounty man, sometimes worse. A man who traded mercy for coin. Jonas hesitated, then stepped aside. "Storm will tear you to ribbons if you stay out there." Clem grinned as he entered, teeth flashing beneath a scar that cut from lip to jaw. "Didn't expect hospitality from a ghost like you." "Much obliged." Jonas poured whiskey into a tin cup, handed it over without a word. The firelight threw their shadows long across the floor. Nia kept still behind the curtain Jonas had hung to give her a shred of privacy. The light made her silhouette faint, but not invisible. She could hear their voices clearly, the scrape of boots, the clink of the whiskey cup, the storm's angry hiss against the window. Clem drank deep, coughed once, and looked around the cabin. "Heard there's a bounty near here," he said finally, tapping the rim of the cup with a dirty fingernail. "Apache woman, crippled. Tribe said she brought bad luck, cursed the ones who tried to help her." "Word is she's still breathing somewhere." Jonas kept his eyes on the fire. "Plenty of stories blow through this valley. Most worth about as much as wind." "Maybe so," Clem said, studying him. "But this one's got gold behind it. $200 dead or alive. Seems her own people want her gone for good." He leaned back in the chair, smirking. "Can't say I blame him. Useless mouths don't last long out here." Jonas's jaw tightened. He set down his cup, the sound sharp against the wood. "Not everyone deserves to be hunted." Clem laughed, low and mean. "That why you live out here all alone? Saving lost souls?" Jonas didn't answer. The wind slammed against the door, rattling the latch, and for a moment the sound filled the space between them like a warning. Behind the curtain, Nia's heart pounded so hard she feared it might give her away. She mouthed a prayer in her language, the words soft and trembling, a plea for strength, for silence. Her fingers clutched the edge of the blanket until her knuckles went white. Clem's eyes flicked toward the curtain. "You got company, Hale?" Jonas turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Ain't your concern." Clem stood, moving toward the back of the room. "Storm like this, man could use some warmth. Maybe share that firelight with whoever's hiding back there." Jonas stepped between him and the curtain. The two men faced each other in the narrow space, close enough to smell the whiskey on each other's breath. "She's no one worth finding," Jonas said. Voice low but steady. For a long second, the storm seemed to hold its breath outside. Then Clem grinned again, a cold twist of his mouth. "Didn't figure you for a liar, Hale, but I'll let it be. For now." He moved back to the chair, poured himself another drink. The rest of the night passed slow, wind screaming, snow piling against the door, the fire dwindling to embers. Jonas didn't sleep. He sat by the hearth, rifle resting across his knees. When dawn finally broke, pale light crept through the frost-covered window. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed white and silent. Clem strapped his gear back on, muttering curses about the cold. "You ever see that crippled Apache? You best send word," he said as he mounted his horse. "Wouldn't want trouble following you." Jonas met his gaze evenly. "I'll keep that in mind." The drifter spat into the snow, then rode off toward the ridge, his shape fading into the distance until it became part of the pale morning. Jonas stood there a long while, the cold biting his skin, the silence heavier than before. When he finally went back inside, Nia was awake, eyes wide and bright with fear, and something else. Trust, maybe. Or disbelief. "You not tell," she whispered. He shook his head, setting the rifle by the door. "No, I didn't tell." She looked at him for a long moment, then reached for his hand, hesitant, fragile. Her fingers were cold as stone, but they gripped his with a strength that surprised him. He didn't pull away. Outside, the last of the storm clouds drifted over the hills, leaving the valley washed clean. Inside, the fire crackled back to life. For the first time, The cabin felt less like a place for ghosts and more like a shelter for the living. Jonas exhaled, slow, deep, the breath of a man who'd carried too much for too long. He looked toward Nia and saw not the helpless figure from the creek bed, but someone who'd fought the same kind of storm all her life. "Get some rest," he said softly. Nia nodded. "You, good man." Jonas turned toward the window, watching the horizon brighten. He didn't feel good. He only felt certain that he'd chosen a side, and there was no going back. Emotional realization. For the first time, Nia feels protected, not pitied, not saved out of duty, but defended as someone worth keeping alive. Jonas realizes the quiet line between mercy and devotion has vanished. He is no longer helping her out of guilt, but out of loyalty that feels dangerously close to love. The thaw came slow that year, like the land itself was reluctant to forgive winter. Snow melted into rivulets that carved through the hard ground, and the air smelled of wet soil and pine. The creek began to run again, whispering its way through the valley, carrying pieces of broken ice like bones adrift. Jonas worked with his sleeves rolled, hands rough from the cold and from effort. He built a small wooden ramp outside the cabin door, hammering each board in place until it sat firm and true. Nearby, 2 carved crutches leaned against the porch rail, crude things but sturdy. Inside, Nia watched from the window. Her hair had grown long again, falling in dark, uneven waves over her shoulders. The scars where her legs ended had healed into pale ridges, though pain still lingered deep beneath the skin. Jonas stepped inside, dusting off sawdust. "Try 'em," he said simply, nodding toward the crutches. She looked uncertain, then reached for them. Her grip was shaky, her movements cautious. He stayed close, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not touching. She lifted herself upright, breath catching as her weight shifted. For a heartbeat, it looked like she might fall, but she didn't. She stood, trembling, and then smiled. Her voice was soft, accented. "I stand." Jonas smiled too, though faintly. "Reckon you do." It took her a week to move from the bed to the hearth without help, 2 to make it to the porch. Each step was a small victory and a fresh wound. She cursed in Apache when she fell, laughed when she managed 3 steps without faltering. The sound of her laughter, quiet, rough, but real, filled the cabin in a way the fire never could. Jonas found himself listening for it, waiting for it, though he'd never admit that even to himself. He fixed fences, tended cattle, mended the roof. And yet every task felt different now, less about surviving, more about providing. When he came in from the fields, she'd be there, bent over a pot or mending his torn shirt. Sometimes she burned the bread or spilled the water bucket, and both of them would laugh, embarrassed, like 2 people discovering they still knew how. But between the laughter, there was silence, a charged kind, heavy with the things they didn't dare say. When their eyes met across the lamplight, the air thickened. He'd look away first, always. Spring brought visitors, as it always did, traders, ranch hands, and churchmen passing through. They'd glance toward the house, whisper and sometimes laugh. The whispers spread fast, the rancher and his squaw, the crippled woman he keeps out by the ridge. Jonas ignored them. At least he tried to. But one morning, Reverend Pike rode up, dust clinging to his long black coat. "Jonas Hale," the preacher said, tying his reins to the post. "You've not been seen at service since before winter. Been busy?" Jonas didn't stop stacking wood. "Too busy for the Lord?" "Too busy for talk." The preacher's eyes flicked toward the window, where Nia sat spinning thread. His mouth twisted slightly. "That woman, she don't belong here. You know what folks are saying?" Jonas didn't answer. Pike pressed on. "You've always been a man of silence, but silence won't save you. You bring sin into your home, it stains your soul. That woman's cursed by her people and abandoned by God. Let her go before she brings ruin on you both." Jonas turned then, his voice calm but firm. "You done preaching, Reverend?" The man frowned. "I'm warning you, son." Jonas's eyes hardened. "Then consider me warned." He went back to his work. The preacher watched him a moment longer, then mounted up and rode off, muttering scripture under his breath. That evening, Jonas came inside quieter than usual. He didn't tell Nia what was said, but she saw it in his face. She'd learned to read the lines there, how anger pressed behind stillness, how loneliness softened in his eyes when he looked at her. Later, when the lamp burned low, she spoke from her chair near the fire. "They say, bad things?" He hesitated, then nodded. "They say what they don't understand." She nodded slowly, gaze fixed on the flame. "You help me." "They think wrong. Don't matter what they think, but it did." And she knew it. The next afternoon, he returned from the barn to find the stable door open. The mare half-saddled, and Nia struggling beside her on the crutches. Her breath came quick, her face flushed with effort and shame. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. She froze, gripping the saddle horn for balance. "I go," she said, voice trembling. "You get trouble. People talk." "I not want make shame." He moved toward her slowly, his boots soft in the dirt. "You can't ride, Nia." "I crawl if I must," she snapped, tears streaking her cheeks. "Better I die alone than make you bad man." He stopped beside her, eyes full of something fierce and quiet. "You're not trouble," she shook her head. "I am reason they hate you." He reached out then, his hand closing gently around hers, rough, calloused skin against fragile fingers. His voice dropped low, steady as a heartbeat. "No, Nia," he said. "You're not trouble." "Your reason," her breath caught. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers through the open door, the first of the season. She looked at him, truly looked, and in his eyes she saw no pity, no burden, no charity, only belief. Something in her broke then, not like a wound reopening, but like ice giving way to the sun. All her life, she'd tied her worth to what she could do, where she could walk, who she could serve. But here was a man who saw her whole, the part that still dreamed, still laughed, still fought. Slowly, she let the crutches fall. He caught her before she could stumble, holding her upright. "Don't go," he said quietly. "I stay," she whispered. Outside, the sky deepened to gold. Inside, the fire crackled as it always had. But for once, the silence between them didn't ache. It hummed, fragile, human, alive, emotional realization, Jonas's words. "You're not trouble. You're reason. Unravel the shame she's carried all her life." Nia finally understands that her worth isn't tied to her body, but to her being. For Jonas, the moment marks surrender, to care, to love, to a future he never thought he deserved. The nights had grown warm again, and the air carried the scent of cedar smoke and distant rain. The land was alive, coyotes calling from the hills, wind sighing through the cottonwoods, stars bright enough to see one's reflection in their shine. Jonas stood by the corral, lantern swinging from a post. The cattle shifted uneasily, their eyes glinting pale in the dark. For 3 nights now, something had prowled near the fences, tracks like knives in the mud, a low growl heard past midnight. Nia watched from the porch, wrapped in a wool shawl. "Wolf?" she asked softly. Jonas nodded. "Big one." He turned the rifle over in his hands, the barrel catching the lamplight. "Took a calf 2 nights back." He hesitated before offering it to her. "Ever shot one of these?" Her eyes flicked to the weapon, wary, curious. "No." He stepped closer, holding it out, waiting until she took it. The rifle felt heavy in her arms, longer than her reach. He moved behind her then, slow and steady, his voice low as the wind. "You rest it here," he said, guiding her hands, "and breathe out before you pull." She tried, shoulders trembling slightly beneath his touch. The night pressed close around them, just breath, wood smoke, and heartbeats. "Again," he murmured. "Don't fight it. Let the gun be part of you." Her finger found the trigger. The sound that followed cracked the silence wide open. Thunder rolling off the cliffs. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. Smoke rose like ghosts between them. Jonas smiled faintly. "Good," he said. "Real good." She looked at him, startled by her own steadiness. "It listened to me," he nodded. "Most things do if you're not afraid of them." That night they sat by the fire, coffee cooling between them. The rifle leaned against the wall. Outside, the wind carried no sound of wolves, only the quiet stretch of the plains and the faint cry of an owl. Nia stared into the flames. "My people say," she murmured, "when wolf comes close, it means spirits test your courage." Jonas poked the fire with the poker, watching sparks climb. "Reckon you passed," she smiled, small, tired but true. The firelight drew soft shapes across her face, across his hands. After a long silence, he reached behind her, fingers brushing through her hair. It was long now, heavy and dark, tangled by wind. He didn't speak, just began to braid it, slow and careful. His rough fingers moved with surprising gentleness, separating strands, weaving them together like he'd done to rope all his life. Nia closed her eyes. "Why you do that?" He thought for a long time before answering. "'Cause it's something that should be done right." When he finished, the braid fell over her shoulder like a ribbon of shadow. She touched it softly, eyes shining. "My mother. She used to braid my hair before hunt. Said it keep fear behind." Jonas's voice was quiet. "Then let it keep it there still." The fire burned lower, coals glowing red as heartbeats. Outside, thunder murmured on the horizon. Their hands brushed when she passed him his cup. Neither pulled away. Love, if that's what it was, came without words. It wasn't sudden or fierce. It was like the land, wide, patient, inevitable. It lived in the way he refilled her cup before his own, the way she folded his coat when he forgot, the way silence between them began to feel like belonging. For a few precious days, the ranch became a small world apart from judgment, two souls mending quietly beneath an endless sky. But peace in the west never held long. One evening, near dusk, hooves echoed from the trail, 3 riders. Jonas stepped onto the porch, hand already on the rifle. Dust rose behind them like smoke. Clem Rourke rode at the front, his grin sharp and mean beneath the brim of his hat. Behind him came 2 deputies, badges catching the fading sun. "Evening, Hale," Clem called, swinging down. "Heard tell you've been keeping company with a crippled Apache girl. Thought I'd come see for myself." Jonas didn't move. "You heard wrong," Clem spat in the dirt. "See, thing is, she's wanted by her own kind. Superstition, they say. But some folks in town got a bounty on her, too. Claim she's dangerous." "She ain't dangerous," Jonas said, voice flat. Clem stepped forward. "You think you can hide her out here, old man?" "Ain't smart. Ain't legal, neither." The deputies shifted behind him, uneasy. One of them glanced toward the cabin window, where Nia's shadow moved faintly behind the curtain. Clem smirked. "There she is." He reached for his revolver. Jonas raised the rifle in one slow motion. The barrel leveled straight at Clem's chest. "You'll have to take me first." The words were calm, but there was iron underneath. Silence fell, thick, suffocating. Wind scraped across the porch, carrying the smell of rain and dust. Clem's grin faltered. "You wouldn't?" "I would." For a moment, no one breathed. The deputies looked at each other, uncertain. Then thunder broke overhead, close and sudden, shattering the tension. Clem cursed under his breath, turning back to his horse. "This ain't over, Hale," he muttered. "You'll wish you'd let her go." Jonas didn't answer. He kept the rifle steady until they rode off into the storm, their shapes swallowed by rain. When the last hoofbeat faded, he lowered the gun and turned toward the door. Nia was standing there, pale, trembling, her braid undone by the wind. "You could die," she whispered. He set the rifle down, his voice low. "Worth it." Lightning flashed across the sky, painting the room in white. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the smell of smoke and rain. "You're not a ghost, Nia," he said softly. "You're here. You're alive. Don't ever let him make you believe otherwise." She reached out, touched his chest. The heartbeat beneath the flannel, steady and real. "Then I stay alive with you," she said. The rain came in earnest then, hammering the roof, hissing through the chimney. They stood together in the dimness, 2 exiles in a world that had room for neither, and for the first time, the fire between them didn't feel like danger. It felt like home, emotional realization. Love, for both, becomes not a promise but a stand, something to defend with what remains of one's soul. Jonas understands that protection born of pity has turned into devotion born of truth. Nia, for the first time since her exile, sees herself not as broken, but as chosen. By life, by courage, by love itself. The dawn came cold and thin, stretching pale light across the ridge. The world was still, too still. Even the cattle kept silent, sensing something near. Jonas woke before the sun, as he always did, and knew before he rose that the day would bring trouble. He could feel it in his bones, the same heaviness that comes before a storm. Nia was already awake, watching from her bed near the window. "Riders," she said softly. He looked out and saw them cresting the hill, 3 figures dark against the pink edge of morning. Clem Rourke rode in front again, coat flapping like a crow's wing, the other 2 men close behind. Jonas didn't speak. He pulled on his coat, checked the rifle by the door, and kissed the edge of Nia's hair, a gesture more promise than goodbye. "Stay inside," he said. She reached for his sleeve. "Don't let them take you." He gave a small, crooked smile. Not planning to. Outside, the ground was damp with dew. The men slowed as they neared the barn, their horses snorting clouds of breath into the chill. Clem swung down, boots crunching gravel. "Morning, Hale," he called. "I told you this wasn't over." Jonas stood by the fence, rifle in hand. "You should have listened when I said it was." Clem laughed, short, cruel. "Law's with me now." Sheriff signed the order. "You're harboring a fugitive." Jonas's jaw tightened. "You came here for blood, not justice." The drifter's grin widened. Maybe both. It happened fast after that, a spark in dry grass. Clem's hand moved toward his gun. Jonas's rifle lifted, and the crack of the shot split the dawn. The first bullet hit Clem square in the chest. One of his men fired back, the shot grazing Jonas's shoulder, spinning him against the fence. Horses reared, the world filled with thunder and smoke. The second deputy turned and fled, disappearing over the ridge before the dust had time to fall. When the noise settled, Clem lay face up in the dirt, eyes open. The morning sun glinting off the brass of his revolver. Jonas sank to one knee, blood seeping through his sleeve. He pressed a hand to the wound and breathed through the pain. The air smelled of iron and gunpowder. From the cabin came the sound of the door bursting open. Nia dragged herself forward, crutches forgotten, crawling across the porch and down the steps. "Jonas!" He looked up, half-dazed, and saw her moving through the dust, hair loose, face streaked with tears. She reached him and pressed her hands against his chest, her fingers trembling but firm. "You came back for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. He tried to smile. "Wasn't done yet." She tore a strip from her shawl, pressing it against his wound. The world blurred for both of them. Blood, dust, sunlight. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no fear, only peace. By the time the sheriff arrived hours later, the wind had swept away the smoke. Clem's body was covered with a tarp near the barn. Jonas sat against the fence, pale but alive, Nia beside him. The sheriff, an older man with tired eyes, dismounted slowly. "Heard there was gunfire," Jonas nodded. "They came for her." The sheriff studied the scene, the blood, the silence. "You kill him?" Jonas's voice was steady. "Did what I had to." The sheriff looked at Nia, the woman the town had whispered about, the one the drifters had hunted. He sighed, tipping his hat. "Ain't no law against defending your own?" Then he turned and rode off, leaving the dust and the dead behind. Weeks passed. The wound healed slow, and Jonas carried his arm in a sling. Nia stayed close, carving small wooden figures to pass the time. Animals, birds, sometimes a tiny horse with a broken leg mended by twine. The land turned green again. Life, stubborn as grass, returned. One afternoon, the sheriff came back, this time with 2 deputies and a paper in hand. He said they had to check the story to be sure the killing was clean. Jonas told them everything plain, no anger, no defense. Nia said nothing, only watched from the porch, whittling a shape in her palm. When the men left, they left with nods instead of cuffs. Truth, it seemed, needed no witnesses when silence spoke louder. By early summer, Jonas was back on his feet, mending fences with one good arm. Nia had learned to move about with ease. She'd built herself a small wagon fitted with handles, light enough to roll across the dirt paths between the barn and the porch. Sometimes, when the light was soft and the air still, Jonas would find her sitting beneath the cottonwood tree, carving. The shavings curled at her feet like petals. "World's still whisperin'," he said once, leaning on the fence. She smiled faintly, then let it whisper. "We not made of words." He nodded, and that was all there was to say. That evening, rain came again, slow, steady, the kind that softened the air and made the earth smell like memory. Jonas found Nia on the porch, watching the horizon turn silver. In his hands, he carried something wrapped in cloth. He set it down beside her and unfolded it. The old rocking chair that once belonged to his wife, newly repaired. The wood sanded smooth and the seat polished with oil. "It's yours now," he said quietly. She looked at it for a long time, then at him. "Your wife's?" he nodded. "She'd want it used." "Not sittin' empty." Nia reached out, tracing the grain of the wood. "It still move?" He gave it a gentle push. The chair rocked once, creaking softly, the sound of time itself exhaling. "Still does," he said. She smiled then, tears glinting in the firelight from the window. "Then I will sit," she whispered, "and remember nothing but now." He sat beside her, the rain tapping the roof, the world beyond fading into mist. The air smelled of wet cedar, of life renewed. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the chair, moving like a heartbeat against the storm. Emotional realization. Neither belongs wholly to tribe nor town, to past nor ghost. Yet between them lies something truer, a fragile, stubborn peace built by hand and will. The world may still whisper, but its noise no longer reaches where they sit. The fire inside burns steady, quiet and eternal, a testament not to what was lost, but to what endured.